Ben, you're an award-winning M&A advisor, serial entrepreneur. You founded Premier Business Brokers, Kodiak Business Valuations, among a number of other companies.
Typically, most buyers are buying an existing established business with an existing established team that they want. And some people buy companies for the team alone because they can't find, quality employees at times. So they'll acquire just to get a better team in certain instances. If you're trying to figure out your way, my advice would be find one skill, one thing that you can become an expert in and focus on that until it's undeniable how good you are at that one thing. And then what I found from that is that once you have that, the other opportunities can be leveraged or can be bolt-ons to what your current offering is.
Ben, thanks for taking the time.
Raj, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You're an award-winning M&A advisor, serial entrepreneur. You've been involved in a number of different businesses. You founded Premier Business Brokers, Kodiak Business Valuations, among a number of other companies. You have played a role either as an employee or as a business owner, and I think just about every industry, which is it's pretty exciting. And I'm very happy to have you here and talk to you today. Can you give us an overview, just in your words, in some of the businesses you're involved in today?
Yeah. So primarily, the businesses that I spend the bulk of my time in would be Premier Business Brokers, our brokerage firm. We work with smaller businesses, privately held companies, anywhere from 20 million in enterprise value and below. We also have a new brand called Premier Mergers and Acquisitions Advisors, where we're starting to scale into larger size clients. And then we have another new sister company that's called Kodiak Business Valuations, where we're helping people value their companies. We're helping them with bookkeeping cleanup. We're helping them calculate what their post-sale taxes will be, things like that. Just kind of a nice ancillary service to round out the brokerage and the M&A stuff.
I think it's very impressive that, you're able to start all these companies that have synergies around them. It's hard enough to start one business, let alone multiple. So I'm definitely going to be picking your brain on the way you think about that and maybe the way you think about delegation and leverage. But before we get to that, we need to know who Ben is as a person. You're originally from Galveston, Texas. Can you let us know if you were exposed to entrepreneurship as a kid, or maybe when your first taste of entrepreneurship really was?
Yeah. Born in Galveston, but actually I was raised in the St. Louis area. And, I actually was not really exposed to much growing up. I always had a family of, great family of blue collar, white collar folks that, had really steady jobs and were not big fans of risk, And so then kind of when I came along and, started having all these crazy ideas, they were like, this guy's nuts. Why do you think that will work? And I don't think any of my ideas felt safe to them. So, I really didn't get a lot of encouragement from that respect, but still had tons of like great support and people to bounce things off of. But I didn't really have anybody close to me that I could look to for guidance in entrepreneurship, really.
Do you think that plays a role in the way you try to give back today, just with your knowledge?
Yeah, I think so. A huge part of what we do is education. So there's so much opportunity out there. There's so many deals. If I can help people come up with a new strategy or develop their own strategy just off an idea I maybe threw at them, I think that's fantastic. And so I try to arm, all of my clients with as many ideas as possible. So,
And you were also named one of the Forbes Next 1000, I believe, in 2021. So with that kind of recognition coming from your background of virtually no entrepreneurship growing up, I'm sure you're a go-getter, self-starter, you're typical entrepreneur. And I don't want to say chasing the next shiny thing, but definitely I would imagine you're someone that gets bored kind of quickly. I know I am.
Yeah.
Can you kind of expand on some of the industries you were involved in prior to your first entrepreneurial endeavor, and then give us the backstory on that first endeavor?
Yeah. So some of the industries, really, growing up, I went to work in the hospitality industry. I worked at the Labadee Market behind the deli and the cash register. And then I went to work at Red Lobster as a server, eventually worked at a winery, saw that this was kind of a fun side job while I was putting myself through, college. And then eventually I progressed to working in more of like the nightlife industry and venues. And that's actually where I met our shared friend, Mike. From there, I actually went to work for this company that used to be called Angel Management Group. And they eventually became Hakkasan, and then they were acquired by a few other groups. But they became one of the largest nightlife marketing and management companies in the world. They launched the Hakkasan brand around the world and in Vegas specifically. Working with that group, I got to see a whole new level, of expectation and a level of hospitality that I had not known before at my days at Red Lobster. So it was just something that really kind of opened my eyes to what could be. And I think I took a lot of inspiration from the folks that I worked with there. And I was probably in my early 20s. They were in their early 30s. And I really looked up to them and what they were doing. And I almost moved to Vegas a few times to go to work for them, New York once. But anyway, and actually, it was interesting. There was moments where I would be applying for promotions within the organization, and I actually got passed up one time because they were like, "You're too entrepreneurial. Like we would give you this promotion in a heartbeat, but we know that you might not be here in a year." Because and I didn't even see it in myself, but they saw it. I had to have such variety, and I was always trying to work on something. And so they recognized that in me before I think I did. And so then, a few years went by, and I'd stuck around in hospitality. It was through the recession. So, I was an entry level college grad in '09, kind of the worst market you can think of. So I was like, not even getting callbacks for these interviews. So I thought, what, stick around in hospitality a little bit longer because I'm employed at least. And so I did that, but I was always looking for something more. And I didn't know if it was, that corporate job, trying to work at a Fortune 500, or if it was something else. And finally, one day, someone that was working with me knew I was kind of looking, and she approached me and said, "Hey, my sister actually works in the office of what used to be one of the largest business brokerage firms in the Midwest." And she was like, "They're always hiring. You're kind of building your own book of business, but they would probably be interested in you." And so that was kind of my first jump out of gainful employment into, let's see if I can build my own book of business. And in the same breath that I did that, I also launched a small digital boutique marketing firm as my other job because I needed variety, right? So I went into business brokerage and marketing at the same time, and the two had, I thought, phenomenal crossover between them because I could help people grow their companies with marketing. I could help them value their companies with brokerage, and I could actually show them real ROI. So I would say that digital marketing agency was the first real entrepreneurial endeavor that I had, and it actually got me fired from brokering because of the success of that company and the time that I was putting into it. My firm was no longer happy that I was dividing my time, and so I was given an ultimatum. And you own one, I worked at the other, so it was kind of the writing was on the wall for me. And then eventually I was let go, which is actually truly the best thing that's ever happened to me.
When you were let go, did you jump right into your own business brokerage in terms of starting Premier Business Brokers?
Yeah, so I had a non-compete, so I tried my best to honor that. I prepared some documents, but I didn't start operating as a company just to keep everything safe. But once that non-compete was up, I was prepared because in the 15 to 18 months I worked there, I fell in love with working with small business owners and just the excitement of jumping into a different business every day of the week and learning about that business, getting a crash course in it. I was really passionate about all of that, and I didn't want to let that go. So, luckily for me, a friend and a mentor, was there when I was terminated, basically, and said, "Why don't we do our own? You know how to do this. Let's do our own." So, with his encouragement, his name's Rick, great guy, one of my dearest friends and business partners today. But when he encouraged me to take that leap with him, we made our plans and launched Premiere in 2014, which was our inaugural year, and then it's really been off to the races since then.
That's awesome. I didn't realize Premier's only been around since 2014. It's such a staple in the St. Louis business community. I know whenever I have that shiny object syndrome and I'm looking for businesses that I'm not really going to buy, I end up on Premier's website quite often.
I appreciate that.
And to be honest with you, there have been times where I've had friends that are looking for businesses and I send them to Premier. This is prior to even knowing who Ben
Wow.
Strake is or anyone there. It's just, you're the first, you're really, in my mind, the premier business brokerage in St. Louis. And I hope I'm not offending anyone, but I can't think of anyone else, to be quite honest with you. So
I'll take it.
that's a
Thank you.
cosign.
Thank you. I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, you're welcome. And you said when you were working at the first one and you had your marketing firm, you wanted to provide value to clients through two different avenues, pretty much. And that's kind of what you're doing today with all the different entities that you have. Was that something you've always looked to do? Like, have you always looked to just figure out ways to add more value than others? Is that something that's maybe a natural trait for you, or is that something you developed, do you think?
I think it was trying to focus on, one service or one task and trying to become really good at that one thing. And then as we, felt more confident and felt more of an authority on that matter, we started realizing there were these other things that could be added that could just further round out, becoming maybe I don't want to say a one-stop shop. I don't really like that term all the time. I like specialists in different areas, but if we can have multiple solutions where we do have specialists that can deliver at a really high level, then I think we're elevating the type of clients that we can work with and give them the best outcome possible. And so I think those add-ons, those add-on services have really just kind of developed and through the years as we've learned.
That makes a lot of sense. And then, given the fact that you're working with so many clients, you've bought companies yourself, you've helped friends buy companies, I would love to hear, and I'm sure a lot of listeners would love to hear, how you even think about valuing a business. For me, valuing a piece of real estate is easy, it's straightforward. We can get into the weeds, and it's not necessarily as easy as maybe valuing a single family home if we're talking commercial real estate. But valuing a business is completely foreign to me, and I'm sure many others. Where do you even start to think about business valuations?
Yeah. So for me, I mean, there's always multiple metrics that you could think of to potentially value a company. For me, the strongest metric to really look at would be the earnings. And it's confusing for folks at times because there's so many different terminologies for almost the same thing, but there's a slight different definition for each. So you have EBITDA, which many are familiar with, adjusted EBITDA, adjusted earnings, cash flow, profits, seller's discretionary earnings, also SDE. All these things mean roughly the same. So I think it gets kind of confusing for folks when they're trying to figure out, well, what's the method, right? So at the end of the day, the banks are typically looking for, the adjusted cash flow, and then based on that amount of adjusted cash flow, they're going to apply a multiplier to it. Also dependent on what industry you're in. Certain industries that have a low barrier to entry, you'll typically find the multipliers will be lower. So, if a recession comes and I lose my job, but I have a pickup truck and I have a lawnmower, and if I can start a lawn mowing company over nothing, well, I might do that to help pay the bills, right, during that tough time. So, an industry like that typically doesn't have a really high multiplier. Now, if I'm in manufacturing and I've got $1 million worth of equipment just to produce my product, well, that's a big barrier to entry. So, you'll typically find that companies like that may have higher multipliers. And so, it's kind of our job to make sure that we stay up on the most recent privately held transaction data that's out there so that when we're evaluating our clients' businesses, we can go in and really dial into what should the multiplier range be for the industry, and then based on the earnings, where can we go as well with that multiplier? And then there's some other intricacies, like there's intangibles, there's things, do they have key management in place? Do they have contracts, right? Just looking at the outward trajectory of the industry as a whole could be reasons why it may sway the multiplier slightly. And that's kind of the nuanced part of what we do. It's not just exactly here's the formula and here's where it's at. There's some intangibles you have to think about when coming up with the value.
There's a lot of nuance in the real estate space as well. So I'd love to just kind of throw a couple real estate valuation things your way and let me know if they apply to the business world. I think that could be very helpful. So if we're talking about net operating income, a lot of folks are going to look at a commercial property and say, this is the NOI and this is the cap rate. That's the value. It's not that straightforward because the NOI is based on the way the seller's operating the deal. Maybe their expenses are fat, maybe they're thin, and they need, like you said, they need some key team members in there that should be on the payroll. Maybe they're capitalizing some of their expenses, and some of their capex should be in the NOI or vice versa. Do you see that a lot with the seller's discretionary earnings or some of those other figures that you're basing the value on?
Yeah, to some degree, certainly. When we provide, we have an in-house CPA who is also a certified valuation analyst, a CVA. So part of his process is also looking at the opportunity from a strategic standpoint. And strategics could have a lot more value, could see a lot more value in an opportunity than maybe you or I coming in as an individual to buy something. And so it's really important to make sure that we also calculate that type of value scenario, which can be hard to track down. The strategic might be large enough that they've already got a private equity group willing to pay a 10x because of their size, and they're acquiring smaller companies for a 3x. So there's a huge value to them in this acquisition. So they don't mind paying maybe a little bit extra because they're really making their money in kind of a roll-up situation, if you will.
And then depending on the type of buyer, how does risk factor into that, like into that multiple? Like you mentioned, the barrier to entry, that's definitely a major risk. And if you have more of a moat, I would imagine you have more of that, the more of a multiple. But if, for example, you have one key a team member that might leave, does that factor into the decision? Or if you have one key customer and if you lose their contract, all of a sudden your revenue is 50%. Do those types of things factor into the multiple?
Yeah, so the key customer the most, yes, because a big question for buyers in due diligence would be, do you have key customers who make up more than 25 or 50% of your revenue, or do your top 5 customers make up more than 50%? Those are all really key components to learn during due diligence. And if it is, yeah, I've got one customer. My customer is Boeing. I manufacture parts for the F-18. Well, all of your eggs are in one basket. What if Boeing has issues and or the relationship sours? So that's a big risk. So when you look at valuations from that standpoint, you typically need to hedge the bet a little bit and go towards probably a lower multiplier because of that customer concentration. On the other front, with the key employee, that's a little bit more challenging because as the buyer, you typically do not get to meet the key employees. This isn't, a $1 billion merger, right? Where you're going to meet the leadership team in advance. This is a small business that is heavily reliant on keeping the key people happy and keeping them moving forward. A lot of times they don't like change, and change is scary. And maybe the new buyer isn't going to treat them the same way as their buyer they've worked for 20 years, who you may be a father figure to them. So you run a lot of risks there at times, but it's kind of on the buyer of these small companies that you're taking the risk that hopefully the employees are going to stay. And hopefully you're a great person that they like, and you're going to come in with new ideas. And a lot of times I always advise my clients to do some strategy with the seller. Find out, what do the key employees really want? What do they need? Find out what you can do as the new owner walking in day one to help get them excited. And I have my buyers and sellers plan that out together so they can announce it together and really get the team to buy in and get excited about new ownership.
That's a great idea. Like when it comes to real estate, and I just keep bringing it back to real estate because that's my world.
Yeah.
The first 30 days of a new acquisition are the most important. You want your residents, if you're in the apartment space, to really be on board with the new management. And you don't want them to feel like you're disrupting the place they live in. I would imagine for a new business owner, it's similar. You don't want to disrupt where the employees work. You don't want them to feel like you're coming in and changing everything about the way they work. Would that be accurate to say?
Yeah, that's accurate. It's very key to make sure that, things, typically you want things to stay the same. Now, are there turnaround scenarios? Sure. Sometimes the seller may say, I've got this one key guy, but we're having some problems, and you might need to look at this employee right away out of the gate. But typically, most buyers are buying an existing established business with an existing established team that they want. And some people buy companies for the team alone because they can't find, quality employees at times. So they'll acquire just to get a better team in certain instances. So yeah, there's some nuances to that though.
That makes sense. You mentioned that they're not billion-dollar acquisitions. For context, can you let us know what space you play in? What maybe the value is of the company that the average company you're selling?
Yeah. So historically, the average size deal that we work with has continued to grow as we grow as a company. But when we first started, I mean, we had $50,000, $100,000 companies. If we got a $1 or $2 million client and enterprise value, we were really excited, but again, the reason we haven't turned away from doing deals like that is because for those folks, that's a big deal still. That could be the biggest transaction of their life. And it is important that it's handled by professionals and done right. So we still operate and we don't have minimums on what we do as far as the size of deal that we'll work with. But as a company, we've continued to grow and pursue larger and larger acquisitions. So now at this point, kind of the top of our market would be 25 to 30 million in enterprise value for the company. So sometimes you're seeing revenues of 50 to 80 million, maybe even 100, but the enterprise value is probably that 25 to 30. And our goal is really to kind of find a sweet spot somewhere between that 5 and 25, 30 range, because to us, those deals are still very complicated. They're large transactions, but to investment bankers dealing in the middle market, it's too tiny. They don't know how to make, that work for their infrastructure and their cost. So a lot of them actually won't work with clients that small. But those types of deals seem much too sophisticated for kind of maybe your typical business broker, which we were 10 years ago, right? Or 8 years ago. But we have continued to elevate our process so that we can kind of bring some of that investment banking approach to the small business market and the lower middle market. And so that's what we try to do.
I see a lot of parallels there with what we do because we're focused in a space where if we're buying an apartment community, it's too small for a mom and pop,
Mhm.
and it's not big enough for a large institutional buyer because it's not big enough for them to have 3, 4, 5 on-site team members.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of parallels and similarities there. We talked about valuing a business. On the other side, if someone's selling a business, how do you prepare them for that exit so you can maximize that value? And I'll give you another example in the apartment space. Like some apartment brokers will help a seller prepare by leaving some meat on the bone for the next person.
Mhm.
Is there something similar in the business world too, or are you just trying to maximize your operations as much as you can?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think that I don't know about meat on the bone per se, but I always say runway. We've got to leave some runway there so that the buyer can achieve their returns that will help them make sense of this acquisition price. So yeah, and we'll work with folks. Historically, we would be in communication with people for a couple months to a couple years before they're ready to sell. But now we're actually implanting ourselves in the process. I'm becoming a certified exit planning advisor with this platform called Navix. And so Navix is just phenomenal exit planning work that just really helps sellers prepare 1 to 3 years out to maximize their business, maximize their sale. And then we can help them prepare and set up all these different nuances and things that they need to think about in advance along the way so that it drastically increases the chances that they can actually go to market and have a successful sale.
That makes sense. If I was a seller, I would definitely want to sell with you. But if I was a buyer, I think I'd want to find a business not being listed by a Ben.
Hmm.
So do you do both? Like, do you represent buyers and help them find businesses that aren't being sold by your company as well?
Yeah, we do. We
Okay.
do. And really I would say the majority of our company is based around the sell side representation. Probably 85, 90% of what we do is based around the sell side. And I think it's a phenomenal process that we've developed. But my favorite actually is some buy side representation. I love buy side. We have crafted a internal engine that can source off market deal flow at any corner of North America, and I can find things that have never before been on the market for my clients,
Wow.
and we can help them with this exclusive opportunity, hopefully exclusive, to look at these deals. And typically, because of that, they're actually able to acquire for less because it's not an auction scenario. And a lot of times too, they're able to really form these relationships with the other party because they've got time to kind of put the deal together, and sometimes that helps them develop and kind of springboard into more growth. And so that's, at the end of the day, the buy side really is a neat service offering that we have.
That is, I didn't know it existed, to be honest. So
Mhm.
glad you shared that. I do want to talk to you about business operations, but before we talk about that, just in general, are you seeing any trends that you'd want to highlight when it comes to business sales? Are you seeing that wealth shift from baby boomers to younger generations? Are you seeing a lot of baby boomers exit their businesses? And are you seeing more or less volume today than, let's say, a year ago, 2 years ago? Just any general market dynamics you can share?
Yeah, I definitely think. I mean, we're in the wave right now. The wave is there. The baby boomer generation is definitely transitioning a massive amount of wealth. You can even see it in our industry. The number of business brokerage and M&A type firms that have popped up over the last 5 years. I can't keep up anymore. I used to know who all my competitors were, and now it's kind of hard to kind of keep up. But yeah, there's a massive influx. I kind of at times wonder how, the stats are out there. We can see how much longer this may continue to ride. But I'm curious as to what may happen to my industry when you have things like AI coming down the pipeline and you have the baby boomer generation eventually running off this transition of wealth. So I do wonder about that myself. But right now, I think we're having a phenomenal period of time. And two, when you see things like a recession come, and people can no longer achieve the returns that they want in the market like that, or if real estate falls off at times, people will leave those sectors to come to small business acquisitions because they still think it's an area where they can achieve a certain return. Is it more risky? Maybe, yeah, at times. But it's definitely still an area where we see a lot of movement when the market shifts down in certain times. So
It's funny you say that. I was talking to someone the other day that owns a lot of commercial real estate, and he said he was going to buy a company that is totally unrelated to real estate for that very reason. I think, which is interesting. It's got to be there's got to be a big number of people that are looking at alternatives and buying or getting into new industries, new businesses. If someone were to enter the business world, is there any particular industry or industries that you think have a lot of that runway, kind of that you were alluding to? Maybe demographics are in favor, or maybe technology are in their favor.
yeah, I mean, gosh, there's always industries that are shifting and emerging, right? That maybe insurance. Like a few years back, we saw when health insurance started covering more mental health issues. The next thing that happened was private equity started getting into mental health, right? And so there was a huge surge there in that area, and we actually had a lot of clients in that space, and we helped put together a fair number of deals in that sector, probably from like 2016 to about 2022, somewhere in there. But it's still a really hot area. But I think about things in regards to, like, say, climate change. I think about heating and cooling companies and things like that. I'm seeing a lot of movement right now in those, but also service related businesses, things that are reliant upon baby boomers who probably used to go cut their grass or used to go do this and that around the house, are getting older and they're not doing some of these services anymore, and they're relying on these third party companies to handle it. So I've also in the last 3 or 4 years seen a really big shift and movement in that area as well. So
That's a great point. I haven't even thought of the services that, baby boomers may need more of today than a few years ago. Are there any buyers out there? I'm sure they exist, but is there a large segment of buyers out there that are kind of looking to do a roll up of sorts with the ultimate goal of selling to a bigger or larger organization that's doing an even bigger roll up. I've heard of that in the car wash space.
Mhm.
Just curious if you see that in other industries as well.
Yeah, no, it's definitely happening, and I actually it's one of the strategies that I employ. I've worked with some clients who were, doing roll-ups, essentially, taking advantage of arbitrage, buying small businesses for 2 or 3 times, 4 times the earnings, packaging them together, and then selling them to a larger group, or private equity was backing the proprietary, or I'm sorry, the principal, and then running with them to grow and scale to sell to a publicly traded company eventually. So we see that happening, and I personally have seen a real opportunity for individuals like myself or yourself that you could go out and put together kind of a micro roll up where you piece together 4, 5, 6 companies and then sell to one of these consolidators who is actually doing a full fledged roll up. And I think the multiplier return is still phenomenal. You could double, triple your investment. We had a client who they were acquiring mental health for 2 to 3, 4x maybe. And in their first partnership with private equity, I think they sold for 10x that the private equity bought in for. And then they continued to grow and eventually sold to United Health for 17.5 times EBITDA. And their EBITDA, when they met us, it was 400,000. They had 40 million of EBITDA. So they
Wow.
sold for $700 million about
Wow.
5 years later.
That's incredible.
That was our second buy side client ever.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, that is an incredible story.
It was a
We should
neat
have
story.
led with that.
I could have. Yeah, I was holding that one back, but that was a great example. And that truly is why I thought our buy side work was phenomenal. And I'm like, we could build a whole company just around this service alone. So,
That makes sense. So if somebody wanted to go in and buy, like you said, 5 or 6 companies to do a micro roll up,
mhm.
you have to become very good at leading, building an organization. How do you think about that? Like if you're looking to buy a company or representing someone looking to buy a company, how would you recommend they think about retaining the existing team, maybe ingraining them into their company culture, and then also working to fill some of the gaps? Because I'm sure if there's one small business, there may be missing an HR person. And then at 3, when you buy 3, maybe you want to have your HR person cover all 3 businesses or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think definitely always looking at the economies of scale when you're thinking about acquisitions. If you already have maybe say your main company, as you look on what we would call like bolt-ons to your existing operation, you would look for these efficiencies that can be created. If they have an in-house bookkeeper, but you already have a bookkeeping team, that might be a cost that you can just cut right out. And so yeah, certainly looking at that. But then within the organization itself, trying to understand the people who help make that organization move forward and what their skill sets are and trying to understand what motivates them. Those are all things that I think people have to really take into account when you're looking at a potential new acquisition or multiple acquisitions. Another thing, too, if you find a really key operator in one, that key operator may be perfect for the other 2 or 3 that you're about to bolt on. And so I think a lot of folks need to look at that as well.
How do you think about that personally? Because you're involved in a ton of different businesses. So, how involved are you actually in each business? I would imagine some more than others, but just curious how your maybe day looks today and how you got to that point.
Yeah, great question. You know, I had a conversation with a potential buyer the other day, a guy I've known for 20 years, and he had actually done a lot of real estate, but he's thinking about getting into businesses now. And he was asking me for ideas, and he's, trying to get an NDA in place with us so we can start looking at opportunities. And I actually said, you know what? The thing I would do almost before I start looking for the companies, and this is because I know he was the type to not want to be in it, running it every day. He didn't want to be in the weeds. He wanted to be kind of a more passive owner. And I said, really, I think you should find the operator first. Find a key person, somebody that you believe in, someone you trust, someone that has talents in certain areas. And maybe they're a specialist in just one industry. So just focus on that. But if you find an awesome person who just got great character and you could plug them into almost anything, well, now the possibilities are a little bit more open that you could find something in 5 to 10 different industries that might be a fit. And then I kind of start my approach trying to find the opportunity after that. So to me, the key operator is as important as the deal, really.
So the people are more important than the deal or even the systems. Like, for example, another way you could have taken this, and I wasn't expecting you to or anything, was maybe really focusing on SOPs, procedures, policies, KPIs, stuff like that. But it sounds like your focus is on the people first and
Mhm.
having the key people in place.
Yep, absolutely. Finding those key people who, have those specialties and can help build and round out that organization. I always look at it within our own organization. I feel like I'm a guy with a lot of ideas. I have ADD maybe, and I'm running around constantly, probably stressing my team out, going, "Hey, what about this, guys? What do you think about this?" And then I think we should do this new office in Denver. And then I run in and probably frustrate the heck out of all of them, and then they're left with trying to make sense of what I just said. And so I know that, but it only works if I have the key people around me who are very detailed focused and that can then sit down and make sense and go, okay, he had one really good idea out of 10. Well, how do we make that one work? Let's make that happen. And so finding the folks to help balance out the team for me is really crucial.
Would you say that because you're not spending all your time in one business or in one place, it allows you to be free enough to think creatively and come up with those ideas? Like, for example, just throwing that Denver idea out there, if you were in the business working there constantly, do you think you could have come up with that type of idea?
That's a good question. I really do enjoy the freedom of shifting gears from one company to the next, whether it be my clients or be my own. And I think that's what helps me relate sometimes to my clients. But yeah, I don't know if I was really in the weeds and had those blinders on. I don't know if I would have thought of, well, we need to make this next step or we need to form this partnership so that we can start offering X, Y, and Z to our clients. I don't know. And I think that's a challenge that a lot of my clients face is they get too caught and working in the business that they're not working on the business. So to your point, I think, yeah, because I get to kind of jump in and out of a lot of things at times, it allows me to think more about on.
A lot of people, I think, start with working in and then they move to working on. It sounds like at this point, you're almost, even with the new acquisition, almost only working on or exclusively working on the business. If that's accurate, how did you get to that point? I think it's what a lot of people strive for, whether they're currently entrepreneurs or wanting to be entrepreneurs. Was it just trial and error? Was it formal education? Like, what do you think led to that point or that mindset shift?
Sure. Yeah, I think mainly trial and error. And it's something that certainly I think the working on versus working in is something that we're always wrestling with. Um, you know, I did start in, right? And slowly over the years I built up enough trust and confidence. I knew what we were doing that and I built enough trust in my team members that I could empower them and give them more roles and take more things off my plate so that eventually they could take those things and run with them. And I think over the years we've slowly got to that place where I can work on instead of in. So, but it's been 8 or 9 years of the 10-year grind to get to that point.
With the focus that you put on, and again, you mentioned the people, the team members, with that focus that you have, is there anything that you do in particular that you think helps with your hiring process? And this is a bit of a selfish question as well because we're going to make a key hire here soon, and I'm just curious to
Yeah.
hear what you do.
I think as far as looking at key team members and how we recruit, we're looking at character a lot. We're looking at culture. We're looking at, are they a fit for what our group we believe is, right? And are they going to get along? We've had situations where we had folks that were phenomenal producers or they were great at one or two things, but they just were not the cultural fit that we needed. And at times, people didn't want to be around them. So it was like when you see or witness something like that going on in your organization, you've got to be quick to move on. And at times we haven't been as quick as we should have been. But so that's a big emphasis for us. And then again, going back to their skill sets and looking at, a specialist and how they may help us elevate. And we're actually doing that right now. We're looking for a director of operations. And I was about to hire a headhunter and go out because I'm like, I just need to find this phenomenal person. And I still may do that, but I realize I have someone internally who also may be a fit for it. And so now we're starting to go down that path as well because I already know they fit the culture and I know they have the work ethic. It's just somebody that I had probably had a blinder on to that I had never really thought about before until literally my drive here.
And If you can share, is this for one of your companies, or do you also have like an umbrella company that runs all of your companies, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so I have legal entities, and things like that. But this person would be for all the three businesses that are centered around mergers and acquisitions and business
Okay,
brokerage.
got it.
Yeah.
And your work in mergers and acquisitions, is that what you would say is your primary life's focus in terms of career, at least?
Yeah, I have maybe 10 other companies, roughly something like that. And I'm incredibly passive in all those. I've most likely maybe found the operator for them. I maybe found the investors for them. I help put the deal together. I help with like leadership. We'll have a weekly call. But overall, I'm really not involved in those. So I would say 85-90% of my focus is all around the M&A work and the brokerage work.
Makes sense, and I appreciate that clarity there. The 10 other companies, I think some of them are in hospitality.
Mhm.
The ones that are in hospitality, I'm sure you faced a lot of COVID disruptions. How did you navigate through that? But then also, were there other disruptions in some of your other businesses that may be COVID related or not, that were major challenges or setbacks?
Yeah, so I mean, COVID was a wild time for everyone, and even from the M&A perspective, I had clients that were kind of dying on the vine, and then I had clients who were having their best year ever because of it. So it was really across the board for us. Our hospitality group, we have 5 locations right now. Most of them are in St. Louis City, and to be frank, it kind of depends on where you were located. I had clients in the middle of Missouri having record years, great takeout, but in the city area, it was just treated differently. And so, we really didn't have anywhere near the business we had, and it was incredibly challenging. It was so tough in those early days, sitting down with your staff and saying, guys, I don't know what's going on, and I don't know how long this is going to last. And to kind of lay them off, but then have the PPP and those other options come along. Luckily, that helped carry us in a lot of ways. But yeah, it was incredibly challenging. And we actually had just bought a new building March 15th of 2020 in preparation of our new location that we've been working on for 6 months. And then 2 days later, we shut down every store that we had. So it was kind of a wild moment thinking about the investment we were making in this building. I have to give a shout out too to my business partner, Tommy. Tommy had just launched Nomad, one of our new concepts. I believe he launched it the last week of February of 2020. And by March, and he worked 6 months planning for this thing, killing himself. 3 weeks later, we shut down for COVID. And then they reopened during the pandemic. And that was actually our most profitable store throughout the pandemic. And he paid off all of our debt while the pandemic was still going on. So Tommy was a workhorse and a phenomenal chef. But that guy got it done when all of our other stores were kind of hurting.
That's incredible. So for you to find a Tommy, is that just something that happens organically for you because of the connections you have in the business world? Because it's one thing to hire someone, and we talked about the hiring, but it's a totally different thing to partner with someone and trust them in that manner, especially if you're going to be hands off.
Yeah, it's a little bit of luck. It's a little bit of, trying to maintain relationships with folks and treating folks the right way. Really, and something I'm actually really proud of with our group of companies. We try to promote within when possible. And, there are a number of people who have come on to consult for us or they've been an employee of ours. And then later, eventually, they became a partner and an owner with us because we saw talent in them or we saw drive. Tommy's a perfect example. Tommy at one point came on just to help us launch Bird and Barrel, and then went to a couple other shops as an executive chef. And then eventually we lured him back and recruited him to come be our new partner. I tip my hat. My partner, Bob Brazell, is another gentleman that I've known for about a decade now. And Bob oversees all of our restaurants. And Bob is really close with Tommy. And that's really how we got Tommy, is because of the relationship with Bob. But Bob is somebody that I, found luckily through some mutual friends and was able to build, the relationship there. And he came on and he's been a phenomenal partner for us the last decade.
I've got to ask you then, to me, you come across as someone who's very friendly and knowledgeable. Like you're not afraid, in my opinion,
Sure.
brief experience together, to give your direct opinion on something, or essentially give facts, whether or not that's accurate. I don't know. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I think it is.
So aside from
Yeah.
that, aside from being someone who is friendly and also knowledgeable and willing to give their opinion, what else do you think someone can do in order to form these types of relationships, strengthen these types of relationships? Is it just staying in front of people? Is it just putting yourself out there as much as you can with particular types of people? Like, do you have any tips for someone that maybe wants to form relationships and maybe find business partners?
Yeah, I mean, I think putting yourself out there is a great way to say it. Don't be afraid of taking the risk or having the conversation or asking. Sometimes I get people that reach out looking for a job or looking for some work, and just from the boldness of their email, I'm like, "You know what? I like this. I'm gonna give this person a shot." They didn't go through my normal channels, but you know what? I'll have a meeting with you. Or they asked to pick my brain on something. It's some person in college maybe, and I'm like, sure. I'll give you 30 minutes of my time. Let's do it. But yeah. So another piece too that I would think of with the relationships would just be do what you say you're going to do, right? The follow through. And I'm not always the best at that, but I try my best. And, I do get very busy at times and I don't always keep up on that. But if you do what you say you're going to do, then people come to depend on you. And I find that really that's one of the best metrics that you can track with that is hopefully going to allow you to build long-term relationships, being a steady person that they can count on, right? You show up at the meeting on time, things like that. And I kind of got that, I think, from sports and athletics growing up. If you're on time, you're late. I cannot stand being late to a meeting. It drives me nuts. And once in a while it happens, maybe once or a couple times a year, but I like develop a nervous tick if it starts going on. But I got that from, I think, athletics growing up.
Another question for you along those lines is like, I get the not being late piece, and if you're on time, you're late. Totally get that. How do you feel about formalities around like the way you dress, the way you act, the way you speak? Do you think folks should try to be authentic and just be true to themselves, or should you try to conform to the business world? Navy blue suit, white shirt. What does it depend on the industry? Like, do you have any strong opinions one way or the other there?
Yeah, I think it depends on the industry. And I came from a place when I was working through college in hospitality. I was working for Ameristar Casino. So I went to work every day in a suit. And I came to my first day of work at a business brokerage firm wearing a suit, and they were like, "What the hell are you doing?" I was this 26-year-old kid in a room full of 40 to 70-year-olds, and they were a little bit more casual. They're still dressed, business casual, but kind of like I would be today, or something along those lines, or a polo or something. And what they taught me was, look, we're working with folks that own, an auto shop, or they're in lawn care, or it's a manufacturing company, and you might have to visit their business confidentially and walk through. And if you're in a suit, you might stand out, and their whole company's gonna go, "Who was that guy or gal?" So it's really important to kind of dress to your crowd and what you're going to. And so that was something that they, kind of instilled in me, even though I thought, they were kind of sloppy at the time. I was like, okay, I was like, it does make sense. And so yeah, I would say we kind of take more of a casual, but we know when to, throw the suit back on and with that crowd. And as we scale as a company and start working with larger and larger businesses, we kind of have to fit more of that role of the investment banker type where we may wear a suit more often. So
That makes sense. With the scaling of your company, what's one thing or a couple things that you're doing to help maintain the culture you have today? Because with scale, you're not touching or speaking to as many people on a daily basis. And I'm sure even some of the leaders in your company aren't. So, how are you trying to maintain that culture? How do you think about that as you grow?
yeah, I mean, you have to protect that culture at all costs. And admittedly, I thought and I believe we truly had a phenomenal culture. And there were some times over the last few years that I let it slip. It's my fault. I didn't act fast enough when I should have. And I let certain, personalities come in that did not fit with our culture. But I gave that up for their talent, right? And that was a mistake. And now that we've reverted back, we've reestablished and are building back. The culture as strong as we've ever had it, and so I'm really proud of the strides that we're making. And then the thing that comes with that is production's up, everybody's working harder, everybody's having fun, everyone's making more money, everyone, is thinking about new ideas for how we can grow. We've got this whole new team of advisors now to Denver that are coming to our office to meet with us, and they are incredibly excited about joining our culture and our team. So, I mean, I can't speak enough to how important that is.
You currently serve St. Louis and recently opened the office in Denver, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Any other plans to open offices in any other cities at this time?
So with those two locations, we'll be licensed in Colorado. We're licensed in Illinois to do M&A work. And then there are another 33 states that do not require licensing. So we'll be operating in about 35 states around the country. And then we'll be looking to other states that we need to add our compliance to, where we have a nice influx of business potentially coming. We may not expand our footprint much more because we're kind of covering most of the country as is. But I definitely could see a third or a fourth office down the road.
Got it.
So it's more about the people, actually. If I find a really key
there you
person,
go.
that's why I went to Denver. I had a really established M&A advisor contact us and ask if we would open an office there because he was looking for a change, and that's what we built around.
So you're truly living the advice that you gave. You found the person and then the opportunity. That's
right.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We like to end each show with what we call a hole in one, which is just your biggest piece of advice that someone can implement in either their life or business today. Is there anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think my hole in one, if you're trying to figure out your way, my advice would be find one skill, one thing that you can become an expert in, and focus on that until it's undeniable how good you are at that one thing. And then what I found from that is that once you have that, the other opportunities can be leveraged or can be bolt-ons to what your current offering is. So that would be my advice, and that would be the advice to my younger self as well. So
that's a great piece of advice. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? And if not, how can people learn more about you, your company, your offerings?
Yeah. So a couple of the exciting things that we have going on. We just became a strategic partner for this organization called CEO Coaching International. It's a phenomenal group of these former big time CEOs who are coaching all these up and coming scaling CEOs. And we're just very fortunate to be in that ecosystem and working with all those folks. Got connected through YPO, actually, through that. We're also obviously launching the Denver market. I'm speaking at the NOCO Hemp Expo in Colorado, where I'm going to be talking to all these cannabis entrepreneurs about M&A and thinking about their future exits, because that's an industry that just continues to emerge and grow, and now it's starting to exit. So, and then beyond that, it's our new brands, Premier M&A Advisors and Kodiak Business Valuations.
Awesome. Ben, thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Raj. Thanks for having me, man. This is great.